Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to IIRSM training, presentation by Rhian, partner of DAC Beechcroft. I will obviously let Rhian introduce herself, but I just wanted to say it is absolutely amazing that we have Rhian here with her wealth of knowledge in this sector. And for anybody who's read the preface, comments like absolutely brilliant. She is a real standout and a truly brilliant lawyer. Sets us up nicely for an excellent presentation, and obviously no pressure, Rhian, to keep up the good work. But yeah, without further ado, just wanted to say, in terms of questions and answers, if possible, we'd like to leave those till the end, and so please put questions in the Q&A box. If you do make a mistake and put them in the chat box, then we will hopefully capture those as well. Rhian has told me that she'll go on for a presentation for 40 to 45 minutes, so hopefully we'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. And just to say, she has also kindly offered to answer any questions if there's any questions of a personal nature afterwards. She has no problem with you making contact with her after this presentation. So without further ado, I will hand over to Rhian, and we'll see you towards the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tam. Thank you. And thanks for that welcome. And thanks to you all for logging on today for this presentation. So as Tam said, I'm a partner at DAC Beechcroft. I'm based in our Manchester office, but we're a national law firm. And my background is, since I've qualified some 20 something years ago, I've been involved solely in safety, health and environmental work from a regulatory perspective, which means that my role is all about advising organisations and individuals in relation to regulatory responsibilities, and in particular, often defending organisations when there has been an incident of some description, through dealing with regulators and right through to prosecutions and so on and so forth. But more recently, in the last several years, our role has definitely evolved, I think, probably in line with the health and safety and environmental sentencing guidelines, which, of course, as you will all know, have increased penalties. And that has led to a positive impact that we have seen in terms of our client base, and also more generally in terms of the corporate agenda. Health, safety and environmental issues rising up that agenda, meaning that we're able to do much more proactive work with clients as well now, advisory work, and also running specific bespoke training sessions, mock trials and those kind of things, which has been very welcome. Now, Martyn's Law fell to us as health and safety lawyers, really, to advise clients on, because as you will see as we go through this presentation, there are a huge number of very familiar concepts, and it has been my very firm view from really the outset of following this law, when it was a bill passing through Parliament, and obviously now it has been passed, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But it's been my very firm view that health and safety professionals have a huge amount that they can contribute to their organisation's response to Martyn's Law. There is a lot that you will already be familiar with in terms of principles and concepts that you're working with every day, that you can use to support your organisational response. So what I'm going to try to do today is to give you an overview of the new law, what it's about, and as Tam said, I will answer any questions at the end. We'll leave some time for that, just with the caveat that there are still some unknowns when it comes to exactly how some of these provisions are going to be implemented, where there is a gap of that nature, I will say so. And equally, there are some very, doing presentations about Martyn's Law, I've been asked some very, very specific and sector specific questions, some of which, may fall into grey areas and that kind of thing. So I will do my very best with any questions that you've got. And as Tam said, if anybody does want to follow up with me, after the event, please do so. My contact details will be on the slides, and I'm also very active on LinkedIn, so please feel free to get in touch with me on there. So without further ado, let's have a look at Martyn's Law. So why do we need Martyn's Law? Well, you will probably all know that it's called Martyn's Law because it's named after Martyn Hetz, who, of course, is the young man we can see on this slide here. Martyn, sadly, was one of the victims of the Manchester Arena bombing, and his mother, Fegan Murray, again, who you will all be familiar with, has been I mean, the strength that I can't imagine, to go on this campaign to bring Martyn's Law to the statute books. But what you can see on the slide there is that what we've been presented with over the past several years has been a terror threat which is evolving and is very, very difficult to try to predict. If we think back, for example, to the 90s, and again, as a Mancunian, I will always think about the bombing in 1996 in Manchester city centre, an IRA bomb. And those of you who are old enough to remember that occasion will remember that followed a very similar pattern that we had at the time, in terms of that's what the terror threat looked like. There were often warnings, and so on and so forth. But now when we look at the different mechanisms and the different things that have happened in just these examples on the slide here, including the very, very recent examples around the anti-Semitic episodes, again here in Manchester and also in London, you can see that the terror threat is very, very difficult to spot. And one of the things that Fegan Murray has said as she's been talking about this new legislation is that we have to accept that we're never going to be able to stop everything. But the idea that she had when she sort of conceived of and started to press for this new law was that we should at least try to make it as difficult as possible. And we should at least, as a state, as a country, be saying to terrorist organisations, we're going to make this as hard as possible for you. And you need to know that we are going to make this as hard as possible for you to deliver these attacks. Now, it's worth noting that Martyn's Law would not impact on it wouldn't stop all of the attacks that you can see on the slide here. So, for example, it may not have had any bearing at all on what happened to Joe Cox and David Amos, sadly. But in other areas, you can see it absolutely would impact Manchester Arena, Liverpool Women's Hospital, and so on, Fishmongers Hall, so on and so forth. So what the legislator has tried to do is to provide something that is of relatively broad application, and you will see as we go through, when we look at the premises and events that are caught by the Act, how they have tried to do this. So what does the new law aim to do? Well, the new law aims to effectively to keep us safe and secure as citizens, make sure that we are prepared for terror attacks, make sure that we can do what we can to reduce the impact of terror attacks where they do occur, provide some clarity on the responsibility for security activity, so who is going to do what effectively, and then finally to improve consistency in security considerations and outcomes. So what we are looking at there is effectively a blanket of security that we can expect. Now, we already see that in some venues. So we can already think, for example, about going to major transport hubs. So you can never find a bin to put anything in a major transport hub, because harking back to the 90s, that's where often devices would be planted. So that's a security consideration that we're already very used to. The whole see it, say it sorted when you're getting on the train. How many times do you hear that? So we already have some consistency, but it's about not just those areas where those premises where classically we might have expected to find attacks. It's about having that consistency more across the board in more of the areas that we as members of the public go to. So looking at Martyn's Law and what it applies to, this is Schedule 1 of the Act. And you might hear a lot of talk about Schedule 1 premises. Martyn's Law applies to the Schedule 1 premises. We'll come on to talk about events in a moment. But if your organisation is involved in any of the activities that you can see on this slide, then you do need to know about Martyn's Law. If you hit certain thresholds, again, we'll come on to that in a moment. So you can see there are lots of very obvious examples that you might have expected to find. So, for example, big retail outlets, sporting events, live music, perhaps exhibition, conferences and events. So you can see those are the kinds of places where you can imagine there's going to be lots of members of the public congregating. But some of you on this call will also be involved in areas where perhaps the terror threat has not been as obvious in the past. So I think, for example, we saw Liverpool Women's Hospital, that was shocking for everybody. Hospitals and healthcare have been brought within the scope of Martyn's Law, which means hospitals and healthcare must comply in the same way as Wembley Stadium must comply, albeit their measures will be different. But hospitals have been brought in. The education sector, I think, again, this is quite challenging from an education perspective. Places of worship, again, we've seen those be the focus of attacks. Higher education, public authorities. I think these are some of the areas where there is a huge amount happening. If you take a university campus, for example, there will be a whole range of different types of activities happening within university campuses, and so they have been caught by the Act. So what we're looking at is, are you involved in one of these activities? You will see, particularly on the right hand column there are some places where I've added in brackets standard duty. What we're going to talk about is what the duty might look like. There are two duties that Martyn's Law recognises. There is a standard duty, which is where your premises would be expected to have 200 or more people from time to time. We'll look at this in detail in a moment. And then there is an enhanced duty where your premises are likely to exceed the 800 people at any one time threshold. Where it says standard duty on this slide, that this means that even if you're expecting to trigger that 800 person threshold, these types of premises will always be in the standard duty. So they will always have the more basic lower duty, if you like. So secondary schools in particular will most secondary schools now these days are greater than 800 students and staff. But they will always remain in the standard sector. Same for places of worship and further education. So just worth flagging there. So the first if you like, is to put in the boxes, are we in one of these sectors? And then we go on to look at what's a qualifying premises. So again, here, important to recognise, we have qualifying premises. We also have qualifying events. We'll look at events in a moment. So in terms of qualifying premises, what qualifies under the Act? So the first thing is there public access? Okay, so public access to the premises, is it wholly or mainly used for a Schedule 1 purpose? So, for example, the building that I am sitting in now, the office building, yes, there are more than 200 people here. In fact, there are more than 800 people here, but it's not listed on here because office use is not part of Martyn's Law. Okay, so from the perspective of the building I'm sitting in, not caught by Martyn's Law. But if I was in an office in a huge shopping centre, for example, there's public access to that shopping centre, and it's wholly or mainly used for that retail use, then it would be caught by Martyn's Law. So we're looking for part one. Are we? How do we have public access? Next step, is it wholly or mainly used for one of those Schedule 1 purposes? And from time to time, will there be 200 or more people present at the same time? So when we're looking at calculations, the Home Office has recently introduced some guidance, and in fact the flow chart, the decision making tree that you can see on this slide, that's taken from the Home Office guidance, and I would commend that to you. It's really well written, actually, maybe surprisingly, but it's really well written. It's pretty straightforward. There's a really good glossary of terms. There are a number of these decision-making trees which will help you to determine whether or not you're caught, and if so, what compliance might look like from your perspective. But it does also talk about how do we calculate these numbers of people in premises. So it gives you examples of where you might get this data from. So do you collect footfall data, for example? Are people swiping in and out? Is there, if you're running a healthcare setting, for example, do you have data on patients coming in and out? Often we check in these days on a touch screen when we're going for an appointment, for example. So it talks about how you might calculate how many people are present. But it's important to remember that the 200 people that it talks about are not just members of the public, but also include people who work in the premises as well. Okay. So those are the three main key decisions: public access, wholly or mainly used for one of these Schedule 1 purposes, and from time to time, 200 plus people present at the same time. The enhanced duty will then apply. Again, we've got the same first two ticks in the box: public access and a Schedule 1 use. But from time to time, there will be 800 or more people present at the same time. Okay, so, and again, the calculation methods that are contained within the guidance are useful. Important here to say that if, for example, you are a retailer and you only trigger one of these thresholds of 200 or 800 at Christmas, on Black Friday, during the sales, it doesn't matter that it's not an everyday occurrence. If you're triggering those thresholds from time to time, so in busier periods, for example, then you will be caught by the law and you will need to comply with it. So that's qualifying premises. Qualifying events. So they are events that are taking place at premises, and those premises are not already in the enhanced tier. So, i.e., they're not already an event happening at a place where there are those enhanced tier measures in place because you've got a space, for example, a large concert arena, which is already complying with the legislation. So a good example in that regard might be you are organising an event which is taking place either at standard tier premises. So, for example, you might have a sports club where from time to time, typically there might be more than 200 people, but not more than 800. But you might organise a fireworks display, which is a big event in the local community, which triggers that 800 threshold. Or you might be organising a concert in a park. So a park is not premises in the Act, but you might be caught. So the first thing is, have we got an event that's taking place at premises that are not already in the enhanced tier? And secondly, is it accessible to the public? At some point during the event, there has to be 800 plus people at the same time. And again, there are calculation criteria which will help you within the guidance. And those people have to be present in connection with the use of the premises for the event. So, for example, if you are organising, take that concert example, people who are at work whether they are security people, whether they're checking tickets, whether they are serving in a bar, whether they are working backstage at a concert, for example. So it involves the employees, the workers at the event, as well as the people attending the event. And the final two conditions, there have to be measures in place to ensure attendees satisfy an entry condition. So that might be that you've purchased a ticket and that's your entry condition. So you show your ticket, you're allowed into the event, but it doesn't mean you have to pay for that ticket. So it could be free. Or there might be some other type of entry condition. For example, there might be membership of a club. There might be any other number of types of entry condition. But what this doesn't do is it wouldn't catch, for example, a park run. So a park run is an organised event. Sometimes very big park runs, there might be more than 800 people taking part, marshalling, watching, that kind of thing. But a park run would not be caught by Martyn's Law because for the people watching, there's no entry condition. And that was a bit of a source of debate as this was going through Parliament, because we saw, for example, there was a terror attack at the Boston Marathon some years ago. But these kind of mass participation events are not caught in the same way as Christmas markets. Another point that was discussed during the progress of the bill through Parliament, that was also not caught. Again, there's no entry condition. People can just wander freely around a market. And again, we've seen markets be the focus of a terror attack in the past, but I think there had to be some acceptance by Parliament that we couldn't catch absolutely everything, and it would be very, very difficult to police the act otherwise. So those are the criteria in terms of qualifying events. So we've done premises and we've done events. So let's look at who has then responsibility. So the duty holder is, well, it's called in the Act the person's responsible. In the guidance, it's a responsible person, same sort of thing. The first thing is to say that this is generally, although it uses the word person in the title of the duty holder, it's not an individual. It will rarely be an individual. For the most part, this is an organisational person. So from our perspective as lawyers, it's a legal person, but it's not an individual. So typically it will be the organisation. So whoever has control of the premises in connection with the Schedule 1 use, so in connection with the use as leisure facilities and events complex, whatever it might be. So whichever organisation has that control. And secondly, qualifying event, control of the premises at which the event is to be held in connection with the use for the event. Okay, so we're looking at this control test. And I guess really this is the first area where I would say to you as health and safety professionals, this is really familiar territory. You know, we often have to determine, particularly where you have a multi-occupancy building, for example, who's in control and how will that work. And it's worth saying that a little bit like fire safety, building safety, there might be more than one organisation that has responsibilities under Martyn's Law, and therefore, you know, a little bit like fire safety, we need to make sure we're cooperating and coordinating, and the law provides that that must happen. So that's dealt with on a slightly later slide, but the duty holder is the person responsible, and it's talking about this element of control. There are specific examples within the Act where the Act actually specifies who the responsible person will be, and it's tending to be in the public sector space where that's happening. So, healthcare, schools, education settings, and then also public authorities, local authorities typically, they will be the responsible persons. But as I say, it's tending to be in that public sector space where the responsible person is specified. But otherwise, it is for you to work out, and there's something that we're doing with clients at the moment, is working out where they are the responsible person for particular premises or events, and what that therefore looks like for them. So, what does the responsible person have to do? The first thing the responsible person has to do is to notify the Security Industry Authority, and we'll talk about them later, but they're going to be the regulator. You've got to notify the Security Industry Authority when you become the responsible person or cease to be the responsible person for an event or premises. And you have to do that within the required time. Now, this is an area where we don't have the full detail as yet in terms of how quickly that must happen, what that notification must look like. I know that the Security Industry Authority and the Home Office are working on that at the moment. But effectively, for those of you who are familiar with the Building Safety Act, this will be a familiar kind of path for you. But effectively, what this is doing is saying where you are responsible, you must put yourself on the SIA's radar. The SIA will then have to go through a process whereby they effectively risk assess where they're going to start with their inspection activities and that kind of thing. So you have to make this notification. As I say, we're waiting for further details, but it's expected it will be a relatively straightforward online process to carry out that notification to the SIA. So that's the first thing that must happen. And then in terms of what the duty itself looks like, that very much depends whether you're in the standard tier or in the enhanced tier or running an event. Now, first thing to say is some organisations that we're working with in terms of mapping at the moment, what we're doing is we're talking to them about, okay, let's look at what is the breadth of your operation, where do you have elements of that operation that fall within this new legislation, and where you have elements that fall within the legislation are some elements standard duty, some elements enhanced duty. Are you running some events? And for some of our clients, the answer is yes to all three. So they will have to do all of this. But this is the place to start in terms of organizational response, is understanding, okay, if we think we might be caught by Martyn's Law, let's map this out and see what it is that we've got to do and where within our organization. So let's look first at the standard duty. So remembering that the standard duty is where you've got premises that are caught by Schedule 1, and you're likely to have from time to time more than 200 people at the same time. So effectively 200 to 799. So the standard duty, the objective of the standard duty is to reduce risk of physical harm in an attack at or in the immediate vicinity of the premises. So just pausing there, this is a reactive duty. It's saying, let's make sure that you have got procedures in place where so that you know what you're going to do if there is an attack that happens at your premises or in the immediate vicinity. So the duty is to implement appropriate public protection procedures. So what that means is procedures for evacuation, for moving people, for preventing people leaving if that's what has to happen, for providing information in terms of what's happening. Okay, so it's effectively to say a little bit like with fire safety, where we have an incident of some sort, or we're concerned that there has been or is going to be an incident. What do we do? And it's going to be about drilling into that detail and making sure that those working in standard duty premises know what they need to do if an attack happens. As lawyers, we were all a bit exercised about this idea that we should have to have protection procedures where there is an attack in the immediate vicinity of the premises. So sort of thinking, okay, well, we can control what happens within our premises perhaps, but what about the immediate vicinity? And that those fears have been allayed a little bit by the guidance that we've now had, which tells us that the immediate vicinity really does mean the immediate vicinity, and it's about making sure that you are really aware of your surroundings. So, for example, if you run some sort of premises where it's habitual for people to have to queue outside to get in. So perhaps you're running a concert venue, or you're running a super cool bar or restaurant or something where you've got people perhaps on a pavement outside, or a museum with a big exhibition happening. It's about, what will we do if there's going to be an attack at your premises or around the premises? What provision would you have in place? For example, maybe you want to bring people into the premises and secure the premises so that if you had a marauding attacker, for example, they wouldn't be able to get into the premises. So that's what the standard duty is really looking at. It's looking at, how do we have a consistent level of response if there is an attack that happens. Turning to the enhanced duty and the events, organisations in that sector have to do everything that's in the standard duty, which is why I call it standard duty plus. They've got to have those reactive procedures, but also what the law is looking for you to do is to reduce the vulnerability of your premises to terror attacks and reduce the risk of physical harm. Okay, so that is more than looking at risk assessment, which of course is, bread and butter for the people on this call, I know. So thinking about, what is it that we do? What is it that we might, how might we become the target of a terror attack? And what can we do in terms of implementing public protection measures to reduce the vulnerability of our premises to terror attacks and reduce the risk of physical harm? Okay, and the duty there is to be implemented so far as is reasonably practicable, which again, if you've got that on your health and safety bingo card, is a concept that everybody on this call will be really, really familiar with. And again, one of those reasons why I say that I think health and safety professionals will have a huge amount to add to their organisational response. So when we are thinking about measures, what do we have to do? It's really the plan, do, check cycle. Making sure that you're identifying and putting in place measures and keeping them under review. So things like monitoring the premises in the immediate vicinity, taking some examples. So my office where I'm sitting right now is not very far from Manchester Central, which is sometimes used for different organisations to come and have exhibitions. The terror threat in a place like that will change depending on who it is that's using the venue. Okay, so if you have a political party, for example, that's using the venue, the terror attack threat may increase because it may be the government, or it may be that something in particular that political party is planning to do or takes a view on is objectionable to a large number of people. So it's, that impacts not only on that particular venue, but impacts the immediate vicinity of that venue, but it also impacts the people around that venue. So other businesses who are in close proximity to that venue. So it's thinking about those kind of things from your organisational perspective. It's being on top of what the terror threat looks like, and it's thinking about what measures how are we risk assessing, what control measures do we then need to put in place in terms of our venue. Again, it's talking about movement of people in and out of premises, measures that you can take for physical safety of premises, looking at reducing the vulnerability of premises to attacks. So things like, I was talking to a security consultant quite recently who was saying that one of the big things that a lot of organisations are doing now is placing big concrete planters. So it looks lovely around your venue, around your premises, but it stops the use of a vehicle as an attack method, for example. So it's that kind of thing, practical measures to reduce the risk. And also making sure that you've got security of information. So how, for example, are you dealing with any floor plans that you have? Because floor plans, building plans can be very, very useful to terrorists in terms of planning. So making sure that those kind of things are not freely available, that they are securely dealt with, that it's on a need to know basis and so on. So that's what the enhanced duty looks like. So standard duty, as I say, is the reactive procedures that have to be in place, and then the enhanced duty in the event space, because there are more people attending, there is also that proactive duty to identify through risk assessment and then implement public protection measures as far as reasonably practicable. If you are in the enhanced duty space, because you have big premises or you're running an event, you have to document compliance. Again, this is kind of familiar to many of you, I'm sure. It's almost a safety case type of requirement that's in place in terms of the need to prepare and maintain a statement of what you are doing to comply. And interestingly, a little bit like the Building Safety Act, you're going to have to provide a copy of that to the SIA as soon as reasonably practicable after it's been prepared, and also within 30 days of any revision. So there is that need to be clear and to document and have that with the SIA. Again, putting yourself on the radar, but it's a good opportunity to very early be giving the SIA the confidence that you know what you're doing and you know how to manage this risk, but making sure that that document goes in. So that is a requirement within the enhanced duty sector. And also within the enhanced duty sector, there is a need to identify a designated senior individual. So we talked about the fact that the responsible person will generally be an organisation. That is true. But where that organisation has enhanced duties, they also have to designate a senior individual. And that is somebody who exercises the functions of management or control, has responsibility for ensuring compliance with the requirements, and can take decisions or exercise strong influence over those who do. So at the initial stages, when the Act was going through Parliament as a bill, there was a suggestion that this had to be a director. The final Act has come up short of that, but you can see it's going to have to be a senior individual who takes on this responsibility. Now, enforcement is going to be the responsibility of the SIA, as I have said. I think there was some surprise perhaps that the SIA was given this responsibility, given they have not been used to doing this kind of regulatory work before. I think it became clear pretty early on that the HSE simply did not have capacity for this. I think speaking with a number of local authority EHOs, I think they felt that they actually could have done this, and it would have they had a lot of value to add in terms of really just knowing the patch, knowing what's within their jurisdiction. But ultimately, it's fallen to the SIA. The SIA is working very hard at the moment on getting themselves ready for implementation of the Act, and we'll come to the timeline towards the end of this presentation. But the SIA has recently put out their proposed guidance, if you like, in terms of how they will go about their activities, and that is currently going through a consultation process. Really, what I take from it is that the SIA they're clearly going to carry out inspections. They are going to take, I think, a fairly softly approach to regulation, at least initially. That doesn't mean we can all try and get away with it, but what it means is that they are going to try to regulate by information and by consent initially. But they do have a range of tools available to them. So they will have, as you will be aware from those of you who've dealt with health and safety regulators, for example, they have some broadly similar powers in terms of entry to premises and looking at documentation and that kind of thing. They have civil sanctions, which any of you who've dealt with the Environment Agency or any of the environmental regulators will probably have come across. And these civil sanctions are as an alternative to criminal prosecution. and they are regulator imposed, so without any recourse to the courts, but can be quite significant. So you can see on the slide there, I've mentioned compliance notices and restriction notices. They are very much akin to improvement and prohibition notices in a health and safety context. And they are likely to be delivered following an inspection when the SIA has come to have a look at what measures are in place. But there is also going to be this facility to impose monetary civil penalties where there has been a non-compliance with, for example, one of these notices. And they can be significant. So although they are civil penalties, to give you an understanding, the legislation allows in the standard tier for a civil monetary penalty of £10,000 maximum, but in the enhanced tier and the event space, the maximum is 5% of global turnover or £18 million, whichever is the higher. So very, very significant penalties, much more akin to something that we've seen, for example, in data protection law. So there's a potential for these very, very significant fines, not fines, but penalties in due course, albeit I think we're a way off seeing any of those. I think there'll probably have to be a number of failed enforcement attempts before we get to that. But being aware that that is there, so this is an act that does have some teeth, and there is also the prospect of prosecution in some cases. Again, I expect that to be the exception rather than the rule. I don't think that Martyn's Law is going to be churning out anything like, for example, the number of prosecutions as we see under the Health and Safety at Work Act, for example. But you can see that, just from the brief headlines that I've given you there, and unfortunately we don't have the time to go into any more detail today, but happy to answer any questions. But you can see just by the headlines that I've given you there that there are some real teeth in this act. And organisations really need to look at complying rather than running that risk of non-compliance, as it were. So in terms of the health and safety professional, as I said at the outset, I really do think that health and safety professionals are really important in terms of organisational response. You've got a huge amount of background already in a lot of these concepts. There are clear roots in health and safety law. The duties have got risk assessment at their heart, and we expect that the standard of reasonable practicability is going to be interpreted in the same way. There are lots of familiar concepts around reasonable practicability, around risk assessment, plan, do, check, act, the need to cooperate and coordinate, which is mandated in the Act. So where you've got a number of responsible persons in one set of premises, for example, the need to cooperate and coordinate to make sure that you are acting consistently as you do with your fire safety responsibilities. That's really, really important. Clearly, although there is no specific training requirement identified in the Act, the success of your response is going to depend on making sure that the people who are working in your premises are trained and competent to do whatever it is they need to do under the Act. And so that's going to be really, really important. But again, something that you're already well versed in. One thing just to flag is I do think it's going to be really, really important when considering the organisational response, and this is somewhere where I think you will particularly contribute, is making sure that there is nothing that you're planning to do in terms of your response to this new act, the Terrorism Protection of Premises Act, that somehow then contravenes or jars with what you already have in place from other risk management measures, for example, health and safety. It very much to me brought to mind the way that businesses were apt to respond in the early days of COVID, when there were a large number of people being taken out of workplaces, and suddenly we found health and safety risks arising because of the sort of the laser focus, if you like, on becoming COVID secure, as it was called at the time. It's a similar thing here, making sure that whatever it is that the organisation is planning to do to comply with this new legislation aligns very much with whatever you already have in place. So, in terms of the timeline, this Act received royal assent in April 2025. We are still waiting for various bits and pieces in terms of guidance, in terms of regulations. For example, the duty to notify that I mentioned earlier, the enforcement consultation, which is the SIA's consultation, that actually concludes later this week. And then following that, the SIA will have to publish their guidance. I think from your perspective, important to look out for any guidance that's coming from your industry sector. So we have seen some industry sector guidance developed already, but that will be really, really helpful to you in terms of answering any specific questions that you might have, learning about how the trade organisation, for example, might suggest that you comply, and also benchmarking against others in your sector, which I always think is really valuable from health, safety and environmental perspective, but now also in connection with this new legislation. So keeping an eye on what's happening is going to be key, and then full implementation of the Act will be not before April of 2027. So as things stand, and you might hear in your organisation, well, it's not even enforced yet, so why do we have to do this? That making these sorts of changes can be significant for some organisations on this call. Just that mapping process might be quite complicated in terms of understanding what's in scope and what's not. So really, to start now, if you haven't already, looking at whether you're caught by the Act and what you might need to do. The government is saying that it will be not before April 2027 that the Act will actually come into force. Again, that's a wait and see. We'll have to wait and see. I suspect it won't be too far after that. So at some point next year, the law will be enforced, and at that point, there are no excuses. At that point, you have to comply. So that's the timeline. So in terms of what you can do now, mapping out the scope for your organisation is important. Consider those existing risk management measures, and what guidance do we have? As I say, if you go on to the gov.uk website, you'll find the Martyn's Law guidance on there. I definitely recommend you have a look at it. There's lots of worked examples in there that you can look at, the decision making trees. There is a really helpful glossary of terms which explains to you what each of the concepts means. And through that process, you can start to identify and action any gaps that you might have, any measures that you think you might need to take in order to comply. If you do require any support with any of those steps, we would be very happy to help you with those. And so please do get in touch if that's the case. So I'll just leave my contact details on the final slide there. If you'd like to take a note of those and link in with me, or drop me an email, that's absolutely fine. As I say, I'm very, very happy to help with any questions that you might have. But in the meantime, I have been obviously presenting, so I haven't been able to see what's in the chat function, but I think Tam is going to help me with any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Rhiannon. Wow, a lot to take in there, and as ever, incredibly well presented. And yes, we have quite a few questions. I think there's probably a bit of a concern about whether we need to comply or not. So some of those questions will be coming through just in a second. Just a couple of questions that people have messaged me offline. I don't know why, they're probably a bit shy. High risk premises. So in terms of premises that if they were impacted by some terrorist occasion, they're not listed in your list of premises, I don't think. So are they expected to do something similar but alongside Martyn's Law, or will they be engulfed in it? along
When you say high risk premises, what do you mean by that?
so water treatment works or gas government stations, things like that.
Ah, I see. I see. Okay. So, I've gone back to Schedule 1 because I think that's probably helpful while we're talking about this. So, the idea behind Martyn's Law was about public protection. And I can see that there might be some complicated attack mechanisms through those sorts of high risk premises that you have talked about. But really, the driver behind Martyn's Law is about making sure that we have measures in place where we have gatherings of members of the public in a place for a reason.
Yeah.
So that's the driver behind it.
Okay.
Um, there was some discussion as the bill was going through Parliament about whether we even needed this and whether actually we could just bring this within the Health and Safety at Work Act. Um, but I think it was felt that there was a need to, and arguably the general duties under the Health and Safety at Work Act, you could probably argue that the terror threat should be dealt with under there anyway. But I think it was felt that there was a need to just put this marker in the sand, if you like, and to be very clear about what specifically from a terrorism perspective this needed to look like. But that's why those premises that you've talked about are not included in Schedule 1 because this was about gatherings of people, members of the public, just going about their daily business.
I think what triggered that was the numbers of people, 200 or above 200, 800. And
Yeah.
some of these premises have significant numbers of staff, members of the public as well. Okay. Just moving on, thank you for that. So this is an interesting one. How does a health and safety professional know the risk around specific events? And if so, if they don't, is the SIA expected to give advice on the expected attendance or risk associated with an event?
Okay. So I think certainly the clients that we have been supporting with Martyn's Law compliance, there has been a lot of discussion about um, how does an organisation best respond, and I think there has been a sidelining in some cases of health and safety professionals because security professionals have jumped in and said this is all about us, whereas I think it's a combination of the two. So I don't expect that health and safety professionals will have the minutiae of the detail around, specific security or terrorism threats to an event, for example. But I do think that there is a lot of that transferable skill set that the security professional might not necessarily have. So from my perspective, I think it's a case of working together. In terms of how the SIA will approach this, I kind of reading between the lines feel that they will offer guidance. I don't think they will tell you what to do, but I do suspect that certainly in the initial phases, they would be happy to discuss. But really, this is goals-based legislation in the same way as the Health and Safety at Work Act is. So it's going to be for you as an organisation to determine what good looks like for you. And that's why I think that industry guidance, as it starts to come out, will be really important. So, for example, I know that I think it's the Meetings Industry Association. Apologies if I've got that name wrong, but I've got a feeling that's it. They have, they even before the Home Office guidance came out, they'd started to give their members guidance. The same for the NHS Estate Service, for example, starting to give guidance. And I think that industry guidance is going to be so important because other people in your sector will be thinking the same things and coming up against the same problems. So sharing that information is going to be really important.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. Okay, hopefully that answered that question for them. So moving into the Q&A, I think some of these might be yes, no answers. So let me just quickly read it out for you. So from Greg Minton, would care homes and nursing homes that are open to the public be covered under the Act?
Uh, yes, so healthcare will be covered under the Act, but a lot, well, it just depends on size, obviously.
Okay, hopefully they'll respond if that, sorry, Greg, if that is clear enough for you. Ray West, in a school or multi-academy trust with will the responsible person, oh, it's moving now. Sorry, someone's typing. Will the responsible person be the employer, trust, or the head teacher in their capacity as controller of the premises?
So you can see here for schools, this is one of the areas where the Act specifies who the responsible person is going to be. So for your state schools, it will be the local authority. The governing body will be involved, or the proprietor in a private school setting. I expect the Department of Education will have to put out some guidance because I think education is one of the most difficult areas to sort of regulate and prepare, albeit I know that lots of schools already have, lockdown procedures in place and that kind of thing. So yes, we're expecting to hear more in terms of what this needs to look like and who will do what. But in a multi-academy trust, the trust will be the responsible person, would be my view.
Okay, which would be the same under CDM, of course.
Mhm.
Okay, moving on. John Johnston has asked, if the event is in a public space with a right of way, but asks for a contribution, as the event is a 3-day charity event, is that included? And this is specifically in reference to what you said about Christmas markets.
Okay, so there would have to be some sort of this is probably one to take offline and have a chat about, but there has to be some sort of entry criteria, which typically means there's there's a designated curtilage within which the event is happening, and there has to be some sort of entry criteria. So I'm not really clear what kind of event we're talking about. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to charge for the event, but for example, if you use a platform like Eventbrite to distribute free tickets, you've got a QR code or something like that to get in, but you can make a voluntary contribution. The payment isn't the determining factor. So obviously if you're paying to get in, that will be caught, but you can still have events that are free to enter or voluntary contribution to enter that will be in scope.
Okay, I'll let John, if you're still listening, I think if that's not clear enough, I would give Rihanna a call after this one and see if you can clarify that one, just so you're clear. Anonymous attendee, as PC on a hospital site, would we be caught under this? I presume you mean
So
principal contractor.
yeah, so the um responsible person from a healthcare perspective is on the slide there. So if you're in an NHS trust site, for example, the trust will continue to be the responsible person from a Martyn's Law perspective. It is important, however, that you're aware. So if the trust has particular measures in place, the responsibility is on them to inform you of that. But obviously, you then have a responsibility to make sure that you can comply with whatever the measures in place might be from that perspective. And this is something that is coming up a lot, for example, with our clients who carry out facilities management in. So even though facilities management per se isn't court, they carry out facilities management in Schedule 1 premises, so in big shopping centres, in multi-academy trust schools, for example. It's important that they're aware of what these requirements might look like so that their staff equally can respond as one with the staff of the responsible person, if you like, if an attack were to happen, for example.
Okay, thank you for that. Just as a quick one, I'm conscious of the time. We're at about 1 minute to go. Are you okay for another 10 minutes or so?
I could do another 10, but not much more than that, I'm afraid.
Okay, so we have to rattle through. Just for everyone on the call, we'll do as best we can to get through all of these. But if we don't, then we'll put a response out afterwards, and we'll take a note of all the questions, and hopefully we'll answer those for us. So, quick one here, Adelina. I'm working with the school at present to look at implementing Master's Law and general security. What is the solution when some of the things needed to be implemented for e.g. access control to the premises is impeded by the fact that the local authority owns the external land outside of the premises and they have refused the private academy that runs the premises the permission to implement access control? The access control would be a reasonable and proportionate means to reduce the risk of an MTA in particular. I have advised this to be challenged using the Martyn's Law requirements, but there doesn't seem to be any movement nor urgency. So it's been a long, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, well, I suppose it probably feels like there's no urgency because, as we've established, it's not fully in force yet. But clearly, you need to try to make arrangements. I mean, I think there's certainly, and it's a very specific example, but I would think there is certainly a conversation to be had there around why the local authority might not want you to do that. And I think in those circumstances, it's really about sharing the information as to why you think it's necessary, and to understand why they would not want that to happen from the perspective of protecting those within the grounds of the school. Sounds like I can't quite picture in my mind exactly what that looks like or what that means, but it's difficult to reconcile the idea that a local authority wouldn't want to protect the children. So there must be something more to it, but I don't know what that might be. But I'm happy to have a chat offline if that's helpful.
Cool, thank you. Hopefully, Adelina, that's answered your question, or have a chat with Rhiannon. Um, right, okay. So, one question is, where is this act applicable to the UK and Ireland, or is it just England?
It's UK, yeah.
UK, fabulous.
UK, Northern Ireland, yeah.
Fabulous. Ray, again, is there any guidance or direction available on how evac, invac, lockdown comms procedures need to be packaged up to be submitted to the SIA, e.g. one comprehensive document or a preset SIA format, or as we decide?
So
Thanks so much.
at the moment, there is the guidance which is available online, which is what's called the Section 27 guidance, the statutory guidance, which is freely available online, which you can have a look at in terms of, in general terms, what each of those INVAC, EVAC, those kind of things might look like. In terms of the format of what will have to be submitted to the SIA, no, we don't have that yet. We don't have that, but the SIA are really working very hard at the moment. They are on a massive recruitment campaign to make sure that they have got all the right people in place. They are, working hard on the guidance, and it will follow. It. I know that's not a satisfactory answer at the moment, but it's the only answer we've got. It's a little bit like the Building Safety Act, where there was this very long transition period for implementation, and for a lot of it, we didn't actually have guidance on what everything needed to look like. So it's like that, but there will be a set criteria and a specific format, I expect, but we haven't seen anything yet.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we've got Joseph Henderson Jones, and Joseph, apologies, I'm not going to read the whole of this out, but Joseph is a former police silver public order and tactical firearms commander, but now works in management and health and safety consultancy, and he's interested in the synergy between health and safety risk management and secure and protective security. Given the legislation is explicitly framed around terrorism and protective security, could you expand a bit on where you see the real synergy sitting in practice? In particular, how organisations could bridge the gap between corporate level compliance and the on-the-ground counter-terrorism awareness and operational grip that's needed to make it meaningful. Bit of a long one, sorry.
Yes, that's a good question. So, in terms of this synergy, I think if you sit and read the Act, and I don't expect you to because that's my job, not yours, but if you sit and read all of the Act, you will, the synergies just come from the way it's phrased, the concepts, the principles involved, um, and really from that well-worn path for all of you around plan, do, check, act, making sure that you've got the risk assessment that's suitable and sufficient, and that then leads into control measures that are implemented on the ground. And that is something that I very much see from my perspective as being a strength of health and safety professionals, and perhaps not of others within an organization with different backgrounds, albeit was it Joseph you said that asked the question? I suspect Joseph probably is bringing the security aspects as well if he was also senior within in the police force. But yeah, it's around that sort of management of this whole process that I see the health and safety professional having a real value to add, particularly because so many of the themes will be very familiar to people who are used to managing health and safety or fire safety or building safety, or things like management of asbestos within buildings where you've got multiple duty holders, that kind of thing. So it's really around that coordination as well. So not just the nuts and bolts of how you go about putting in place a suitable and sufficient risk assessment. So what does that look like? What your control measures are? How are you implementing and reviewing those and monitoring their success? But also that whole coordination piece around working with other duty holders, being aware of the regulatory guidance, having the relationship with regulators. I just think it's quite all encompassing really. And it just came back to me the first time I read the Act, time and time again, I was thinking, oh, that's another thing, that's another thing. And as I say, I was a bit grumpy with some clients initially because they were running off to pay security consultants to do all of this for them. And I was saying to them, that's fine. You have to have the security angle. Of course you do. But you've already got a health and safety team in place who can help you with a lot of what this practically means and how to do this. And it's really that I see as the value.
Okay, thank you. We're nearly at the end of them. Um, if we run park museum-based events that expect car parking donations but don't directly charge for entry, would these fall under Martyn's law? I think this is a confusion about if it's a paid event or not.
Okay. So car parks can be caught by Martyn's Law. If I can find the right slide. Um, so when we talk about, I've just realised I've gone back to this slide. I don't think this actually helps us. When we talk about premises is a building or a building, or it does talk about it top left there, a building, part of a building, or a building and other land. So where you have got it doesn't matter whether you're charging or not for the car park or for anything else. Um, where you've got, for example, you might have a big pub that's got a beer garden and a car park. Martyn's Law will apply to the pub building itself, also to the beer garden, also to the car park. Same where you have healthcare. So you've got a hospital with a car park. The car parking is equally caught because that's part of your premises, because the premises is not just the building where the hospital activity happens, if you like. It's buildings, and it can be buildings and other land, which would include a car park, a garden. So you have a stately home that's open to the public and it has huge gardens. The gardens are caught, the car park is caught in the same way.
Okay. Will the um, will the SIA be expecting responsible persons to be licensed like they would a security guard or door supervisor and charge you for that license?
No, so this isn't a licensing process. So I think the thing to think about the SIA in the same way as you think about the HSE or the fire service or any the building safety regulator. They're the regulator. They're not they do have this separate pre-existing responsibility in terms of licensing security personnel. Um, but this is a new role for them. So think about them in the same way as you think about the HSE. And so it's not a licensing process per se, but clearly they are going to regulate those organisations that are within scope of the Act, and you are going to have to tell them that you are the responsible person. They're not going to, as I say, they're not going to tell you what to do. They're not going to sort of approve you as such. They might have questions about your submission to them if you're in the enhanced tier or the event space. They might require you to add things to it, or remove other things or whatever it might be. But it's not a licensing process as such, no.
Okay, yes, no answer for this one. A local country show, one-day event held on a farm on farmland, run by a family and others, but not the farmer. How would this law run for this sort of event around 1,000 people? Would it be applicable or not?
So where you have got, let's look at the event space. So you've got premises, tick. The premises, so a farm is not already in the enhanced tier, the farm isn't in a Schedule 1 use. It's like your event is accessible to the public. The public are coming, there's going to be more than 800 people at the same time in connection with the event. As long as the attendees satisfy an entry condition, then yes, it's caught by Martyn's Law. Effectively, you're bringing Martyn's Law to the farm as such. Think about it that I mean, Glastonbury is a great example. It's on a farm. Of course, that's going to be caught by this legislation. So yes, even if it's a one-off, when you have that many people in one place, then it is going to be within scope and it is going to be a qualifying event.
That's that's brilliant. Right, I have one last question, but I'm conscious it's 11 minutes past two. So do you want to answer it or not? Are you going
Well, let's do one more and
are
then
you
no
gonna
more.
are you gonna let Nicola go home disappointed without answering the question? So
Absolutely not. Absolutely
okay.
not.
Very quickly then. Many events already operate under Purple Guide, SAG, and counter-terrorism guidance frameworks. How do you see Martyn's Law integrating with existing event safety processes without creating duplication or conflicting expectations?
Well, what happens now is under guidance. This is obviously the law, which is an important distinction. What I expect, particularly given the origins of Martyn's Law, is that the guidance will come to meet Martyn's Law. That's what I would expect to happen, to make sure that we don't have those contradictions because it's too important to the success of this new legislation, particularly in the event space, given it's driven by what happened at Manchester Arena. It's too important for anything other than that to happen.
Fantastic. Okay, you're at the end of the questions. So, Rhian, thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure.
As chairman of East Midlands, it is amazing that we have someone of your profile to do these presentations for us. So thank you very much for that massively informative presentation. Just a reminder to everybody, Rhian's put her details up on the screen, so make a note of that. If I've missed any questions, I'm sorry. We've run out of time, but all that's left to say, thank you very much for attending. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I have, and all the best for the rest of the day and onwards. Thank you, Rhian.
Thanks.